today I just wanted to take a look at what are the least played cards in Marvel Snap and then say what I think should be done to these cards to maybe make them a little bit more playable, maybe played a little bit more. Maybe they don't need changes and new cards that come out, we'll do it, we'll talk about it. But yeah, let's use this data that is here on Snap.fan to try and get a basic guideline of what are the least played cards. I think just from experience, I think these look pretty likely to be the least played cards. Oh, a couple are a little bit surprising. Some are definitely not. But yeah, so on Snap.fan, you can look at the individual card stats. I am sorting here or filtering here by only doing collection level 3000 plus, which means that we are only seeing people that are above collection level 3000. That way, people with smaller collections are not going to be considered here, so that just from not owning the cards is less likely of a reason for them not to show up here. The only thing is that Series 5 and Series 4 cards are still going to be less played just because of the unavailability to the majority of people. So we have to keep that in mind too. I am filtering for only Season 9 as well. This is all ranks just because I think the collection level filter will be enough that we can take a look at it. I've just sorted here by the game scene, so I just want to see least played, not necessarily the lowest win rates. We can take a look at that at the very end, but I think it is important to just see what cards aren't being played, because sometimes the win rate is less important than the fact that just no one's putting them in their deck, because some of these cards that are really low played have a decent win rate, but they're only probably have that win rate because they were played in like maybe a featured location, or just like a one-off card sometimes can surprise some people if no one plays that card. So let's take a look at these cards. So at the very bottom, we have Namor, which actually was surprising to me that it was the very bottom, just because I think this card is actually somewhat decent, but I guess 10 power just isn't really enough nowadays to win a lane with the current meta. So Namor usually can't win it out by itself, and other cards that would support this would be something like Claw or Spectrum, and I think those are also not played that much. Spectrum a little bit, but 12 power is still not really enough to win a lane a lot of times. So I think Namor being this low, it is a negative cube rate. I would expect that win percent very low. So what I would do to change Namor, obviously you could just add slightly more power to this. So anything like make it a 4 or 6 with +5. But this is one of those cards that's like one of the starter cards that I think Second Dinner is okay with it being a little bit less powerful, just because it's like a beginner card that introduces you into the other cards. So it does have a lot of really cool skins, so I do wish that it would be improved slightly just so that we can see it a bit more. I do like this card, and I do like the way that you can kind of just dump a card into a lane and hope it just wins it out by itself, and it's only 4 energy. So I hope something changes with it, but probably not. Next card is Shadow King, which is one of the newer cards, so it might be down here because no one really has access to it. I purchased this card as a Series 5 card, and going into it, I knew it would be a bad card just because it's pretty much just a like very situational, worse card than like Shang-Chi or even like Enchantress, because it's just setting cards to their original base power, so it's not removing anything other than additional power. So with Surfer getting reduced, its best targets are like the Shuri cards or the Sunspot and other cards like that. I think this is just really hard to get to work because it requires your opponent to be playing a certain kind of deck. There's not really a lot of situations where this will work every time, so it might be like a good card in like a sideboard type tournament, but nothing else. So I'm not surprised with it being low. I think this could be like a 3 energy card. It would be kind of like what I would do to it to maybe make it a little bit more playable, but just the fact that it's going to be so niche, I don't know. There's not much you can do with this ability. It might just become good in the future if there's ever a meta around cards that need to have their original power reduced. The fact that it doesn't stop ongoing cards just really makes this card hard to play. Next up is Shauna. So I tried really hard to make Shauna work, and it's just a C tier card. It's just a mid tier card. It's not the worst, but there are just better things you've been playing a lot of times with it. It does add a lot of power, but the fact that it has a lot of bad one drops that can come out that can kind of ruin you, kind of make it a little bit of risky card to play out early. And if you play it later, it is pretty expensive. And now with Zabu being nerfed, it is a little bit harder to play this out, like with a bunch of other stuff as well. We'll have to see if there's a deck that this can be utilized in. I do think Shauna could use some slight tweaking, make it a 4/3, you know, make it a 4/4 even, make it a 3 energy card. There's a lot of things you can do with this. But right now, I don't think it's that playable in a top tier deck. So it could use a little bit of change. Next up is Orca. I also tried really hard to make this card work. It just, so many different cards interact with it in a negative way that it's just really hard to get to work. Like, it's hard to, it is not that bad to win a lane with 14 power, but I mean, like, Destroyer is already 15 power, so it's already a better card. The condition is hard to get off if your opponent plays any of the manipulation cards on the last turn, like Arrow or anything like that. Since you're only playing out one big card, there's not really a good way to cheat this out without having its ongoing reduce. So it's one of those cards. It's the 6-drop. I think a lot of 6-drops you want to cheat out to get to actually have the power used a little bit better, but this one's not able to with that ongoing because you can't use Lockjaw, Jubilee, or anything like that. And it doesn't work with Dracula because it doesn't get its full power except for with the ongoing. Next up is Multiple Man, which is, I guess, a little bit surprising, but not that surprising because just full move decks just aren't that good. There are a couple move decks right now that are gaining in popularity, but those decks are kind of like hybrid move, and I think hybrid move is the way to go. And I think Multiple Man definitely could use a little bit to make it a little bit better, but I think it's mainly around the move archetype itself. But the fact that you want to run the move cards without Multiple Man just shows that Multiple Man itself might not be enough to make it worth it. But when you do get Multiple Man to work, it is pretty good. So hopefully they can update it a little bit. But this one, I don't know if making it a 2/4 would make it too good. It might. But yeah, this one's a really hard card to buff. I think you just need to buff the archetype in some way to make it a little bit more playable. Maybe add some more cards like Hulkbuster into the game that could help this card out. Medusa, a little bit surprising here. Being so low, not really that surprising, but I guess since it is collection level 3000, I was thinking just like lower ranks. I think a lot of people will like Medusa still, but any card that you have to play into the middle location, since locations are so variable and you can't really play them out when you want to, this card just really could use a little bit of work here. Like, I do think it is one of those things that's it's a starter card again, that they're probably not going to change the starter card just because they know it's just like introducing you into some ideas, and then once you get the good cards, you basically replace most of the starter cards. So I don't think they're going to tweak this one, but they could use a little bit of tweaking if they want to make it playable, but I doubt it. I don't see a problem making this a 2/5 because it's so limiting. Like 2/2 that turns it like +3 power in the middle because it's just the middle lane. Like a 2/4, there are already 2/4 cards in the game. So like, and this one requires you to play a middle. Make it a 2/5. That'll be good. StarLord, they just updated like a lot of the Guardians, so they could do the same thing to StarLord, make it 2/3 +2. It is just really not played at the top level, it looks like here. But this could just be the Snap fan player base, but yeah, I think just that change, pretty straightforward. Punisher, at best, usually it's a 3/6, like unless you have some sort of way to buff ongoing cards, Onslaught Citadel or Spectrum or something. But yeah, 3/6 is just not enough power to warrant a 3-cost card at this point in the meta, so it needs some sort of thing. I think you honestly could make this a 3/7, make it 3/3 to start, +1 for each, and then it would be a very playable card and probably played in a lot more decks. Just one more power would do it. Mantis is basically like a worse Agent 13 a lot of times because it's like not a guaranteed card. I wouldn't mind seeing something change to this, but it's really hard because if you make it a 1/3, it's potentially too good because it's like a 1/3 with a potential upside. Not really any downside. And all the 1/3s right now kind of have a downside. Like Zero has like a sort of downside. Like you can't play out certain other cards with it. And Titania has a definite downside, which is a 1/5. Ebony Maw is a huge downside. And Blade discards a card, also a potential downside. So I don't know if making Mantis a 1/3 would make it too broken. Again, it's another kind of starter card. Maybe they just don't want the Guardians to be too busted. But yeah, it's going to be hard to get this card. It is somewhat played, I think, in the beginner decks before you get access to other cards. So maybe they just want to keep it like that. Next up, we have Angel. This card, I think, is one of the not great cards for Destroy. Some people run it, but as you can see in the collection level 3000 plus, not really ran anymore. It's kind of been cut from most Destroy decks. And a lot of times it was put in a lot of decks, but the fact that it's in pool 1, another kind of starter card, yeah, it's one of those cards that you just don't get a lot of value out of it because like you draw it half the time, and then even when you pull it out, you're only getting 2 power. So it's like it's kind of like an M'Baku level card that just like you need to not draw it for it to get value, and then you also need to destroy something. So it's only 2 power, and it blocks up a spawn your lane. So I don't know. I think they could definitely make this a 1/3. Maybe would help fix this problem. This one I think could be a 1/3 because it's like if you're just playing this out, you're playing a destroy deck a lot of times. I don't know if you make it a 1/3, are people going to put this in non-destroy decks? Maybe just because it's a good power for 1. It's hard. It's hard to say what you do this. But you definitely can't make it like Chavez-esque where you make it so it doesn't get drawn or else it'll be too OP. Sentry, yeah, this card needs, you're basically playing out 0 power if you don't interact with the void at all because you're playing 8 power for negative 8 power. So I think there needs to be some sort of imbalance there. I think they either have to reduce how much the void is reducing, which then ruins the combo of like Vipering over the void. But I think the better solution would be to raise the power on this, but then it's shangable, so it's very questionable. I think you could also just make this like a retooled to be like a 3/7 or something like that with the power void. But right now I think a 4/8 adding a -8 just makes this card pretty bad. You have to jump through too many hoops to make it good. So that's probably why it's not played that much, other than it being a Series 5 card. Quake has the same problem with the card below it. They changed this card back in the earlier beta to be that it only has its power go off when in the middle location. I think this card would be somewhat playable if they got rid of that and made it so you could swap positions no matter which location you played it into. Right now, this is pretty much only a card played when it's randomly generated, not when it's in someone's deck. I think this could be a good tech card if they got rid of the middle location thing. You could also make Quake a 2/4, but I think you could do both of those things honestly, and Quake would then be like a really like highly played tech card, which would be really fun, I think. But the fact that they kind of made it not playable with the middle location thing is a little bit sad because I think this would be cool to tech into a lot of decks. Crystal, potentially the worst card in the game, I think. It is a 4/4, so it's an understated 4 cost that basically gives you, most of the time, not enough cards to make it worth it to shuffle. Like, it's hard to play out all your cards early on a lot of times in a lot of decks. Like you could potentially run like a big 1 cost and then draw 3 more cards with this, but that requires you to draw Crystal on 4, and then you have to be able to place in the middle location. It's just generally not worth it because then if you're running all 1 costs, you don't have enough power because you need the cards that support the 1 costs. So it just becomes a little bit awkward running this card. I think, again, they need to remove the middle location stipulation on this because that alone makes this like just not playable. It's just not playable at all. Yeah, this was the one card when Zabu came out that just still couldn't be played really. And I don't think any sort of like extra card support could make this that playable. I think they really need to tweak this card a lot. Like you can make this a 4/8 and that would make it like barely playable probably. Like if you didn't change the card text. But yeah. All right, Black Bolt, I think people are gonna try this out when stature comes out, which becomes a 1/7. It's a 5/7 that becomes a 1/7 when you discard it when your opponent discards a card. But I don't think that it's still gonna be. I don't think that deck's gonna be that good. I think Black Bolt is going to be still too niche. I think 5/8 is not good enough stat line. I don't think discarding your opponent's lowest cost card is generally that interesting because a lot of the times the lowest cost card on turn 5 is not really something your opponent cares about playing out. There are very few decks that might care about this, and like something like that, like a Bounce Bros thing that's not popular at all, maybe. But a lot of the times, people on turn 6 after turn 5, when you're discarding their card, they want to be playing out a big card, so or like multiple big cards. So it's hard for this card to get any real value, I think. Uatu, also potentially one of the worst cards in the game. I think once this is in your hand, you can see unrevealed locations. Like seeing the locations, like because the first location shows up immediately. So at best, this is showing you 2 locations, and you're seeing it 1 turn in advance for the middle location and 2 turns in advance for the third location. I don't think that really is that huge of an advantage, actually, because a lot of times it does not matter that much for we're seeing those out, and it's also just like too low statted of a card. Like I think this card should either be a 1/3, or like I think it should be if this card is in your deck, not in your hand. Because some people had said, what if this was like Silver Surfer, where it always showed up in your starting hand? But then I'd be like, well, you're just forcing yourself to draw a bad card. Maybe if it was like Agatha and Silver Surfer, where it started in your opening hand and then your deck at the same time because it drew an extra card, that'd be fine. And just going to go over a couple more here, I think, that are interesting to talk about. Ronin, also not played that much. I think from a +2 power ongoing card, 5/3, it's similar to Dyna, but it requires your opponent to have cards. So I think this could be playable if there's a little bit more support for it, getting your opponent to fill up their hand in some way. The fact that you have to rely on your opponent to fill up their hand, like right now we have like Maximus and one of the worst cards in the game, Baremorto, that can help Ronin out. But I think Ronin needs definitely a little bit of tweaking if you want to make it playable, other than just getting some extra support cards. So, like, I think they could put it back to a +3. They had it at +3, I think, if I remember correctly. And then 5/0, maybe +3 would be workable solution to this, because then it'd be a huge card if your opponent had 7 cards in hand, say. So, and not too many people, like, I think it was a problem before because too many people were running Dino decks, so everyone was having big hands at the end. But the fact that it's not really meta right now, I don't think it'd be that crazy, but it would be a very good card at that point if we did put it back to +3. Because if they have like 3 cards in their hand, then it's a 9 power card, 4 cards, 12 power. I think that would make it worth it. Dagger. There are definitely some streamers out there who love this card, but I still think this is one of the worst move cards. It's really hard to get value off this a lot of times. There are just better move cards out there a lot of the times. And it just, a lot of times, it ends up being the worst card in your move deck. I do think that it is slightly better after the Doctor Strange change. So Doctor Strange used to not pull cards that were lower than its own power when you played it out, and now that it pulls any other card, I think that's a little bit better. But I haven't really tested it that much since then, but I still think that it could be improved upon for sure. Like this could be a 2/2 at the very least, make it a little bit more playable. I think it would definitely be played if it went up to a 2/2. Baremorto, this card is the last card I'm going to talk about, but it sets your opponent's card to 6 that it draws. Like it draws your opponent's a card, and then it sets it to 6. So if it draws a 6-cost card for your opponent, it's basically just a free card draw for them. So I think this card needs to be overstated for it to be worth playing, because it's almost a benefit for your opponent a lot of times. Like it can kill like some small cards, but it's like a lot of times that's not that important, and you can just like, your opponent can just ignore it. It's basically like a Yondu that, like, without giving you the information of the Yondu, because it draws them the card, and then maybe they just were never going to play it anyway. So, and that there isn't really anything that like interacts with like your opponent's deck size being smaller right now. So I think Baremorto, like if it was a slightly better, maybe you could play it with the Ronin But the fact that it's really not doing much, I think, other than potentially helping your opponent and not being overstated. I think this card needs to be at least a 2/4. Like if Baremorto went to a 2/5, like it would obviously be played a lot, but I don't even think it would be like the best 2-drop still. That would probably still be Scorpion. Um, I think that's it. I think that's all I want to really talk about from the low standpoint. Let's just quickly look at the win draw and win percent, see what's the worst. So obviously Quicksilver, terrible, terrible card. No surprise there. Mantis, just also not great. Human Torch, like I said again, the move package is really hard to get work. And also this just dies to Killmonger and other stuff. Medusa, starter card, requires middle location. Yellow Jacket is a little surprising here. It's played in the most games here. It seems like people just don't know how to play this card because I think Yellow Jacket is really strong, especially with some specific cards like Valkyrie and Adam Warlock. StarLord, like I said, could use a little bit of help. Make it a 2/3 +2. Mr. Sinister is a little surprising here because I think Cerebro 2, this card is pretty good, and I'm very surprised with this actually. It might just be because people are playing it in some decks they shouldn't be playing it in. Baremorto, yeah, no surprise there. Like I said, one of the worst cards. Crystal, one of the worst cards. Hawkeye, just one of the worst 1-drops. Domino, also really bad. Yeah, like anyone who's running Quicksilver and Domino, I immediately think, oh, free win. Because I think they definitely, their deck building, they're making some assumptions that I think are not great for their deck. It's just making their deck work worse most of the time. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.